you're going to
Oh,
start.
yeah. Yeah, I can start. So, hi, everyone. Welcome back from lunch. We are excited to jump into our next presentation and start the final leg of our CPX journey. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Tessa Pazanik. I am an intern at ASI. I am very excited to present our next session since I have a passion for theater. Thembi Duncan, the Director of Arts Engagement and Education at Shea's Performing Arts Center, is joined by Lieutenant Craig Macy and Captain Stephen Nichols from the Buffalo Police Department. I'm very proud of the work they are doing in support of our community, and today they will be sharing with you their collaborative training program. They train new recruits on cultural competency and nonverbal communication using theater-based body language training. While this presentation is taking place, we ask that you keep yourself muted. There will be parts of this presentation that are interactive, and they will let you know when you can and should join in. You are encouraged to leave your video on if you are comfortable with that so that we can see our community gathered here today. Feel free to use the chat to introduce yourself, share your thoughts and ideas, and to ask any questions. We also encourage you to use the reactive buttons if you hear something that inspires you or excites you. It is now my pleasure to introduce Thembi, Craig, and Steve. Take it away.
Great. So hello, everyone. I'm Thembi Duncan, Director of Arts Engagement and Education at Shea's Performing Arts Center, and we're here to talk to you today about our partnership with the Buffalo Police Department on theater-based body language training for police cadets. I'm going to turn it over in one moment to Captain Stephen Nichols. He's going to tell you about how this all came about from his perspective. One moment.
Ready. Hi, thank you for having us here today. My name is Steve Nichols. I am a captain with the Buffalo Police Department, and I oversee the community policing program for the department. We're very proud of, I'm going to give you a little overview of our community policing. Our philosophy of community policing is to engage the community and empower the community so that they can share in the responsibility of keeping the neighborhood safe. Thembi has helped us do that with a workshop that we call body language training. People have a perception of police officers in society, and they judge us based on their experiences in the past, what they hear in the media. We're trying to break that down. We have a number of community programs that we do in the city of Buffalo. We have a very large immigrant community. We work very closely with them. We have an organization called the Peacemakers that is made up of an umbrella group of 6 or 7 different community groups that work very closely with us. One of the hardest things that we have to do is to overcome that perception of being standoffish, of being robotic. You know, one of the hardest things for people to understand about police officers is that we are human. One of the problems is, and Thembi and I were talking about this earlier, is when an officer puts that uniform on, there's a big weight in that uniform. That uniform can be very heavy. That badge can be very heavy sometimes because your responsibility now is to go out there and be a guardian in our society and take care of problems for people. And sometimes we come off as being very stiff and very staunch, and Thembi has helped us to try and break that down. We started a couple of years ago. Our Commissioner Lockwood, is very community minded, and he put together a group of local people, Thembi Duncan, a local TV announcer, a DJ and general manager of a local radio station, and we actually meet regularly. Due to this pandemic, we haven't been meeting as much as we'd like to, unfortunately, but we meet regularly and we talk about what can we do to engage the community and to partner with the community and to show the community that we want to be partners, that we want to work together. And we've done a number of different things. One of the things that we're very proud of that we've done is an all-day workshop called Girls Empowerment. It was called Girls World, I believe. Girls Run the World. And we brought in young girls, and Thembi and everyone else came in and just did workshops with these kids and really broke things down and got to know the kids, got to show them that we are here for them and that we want to work together. And then we ended the day with having a dodgeball game with the mentors and the Buffalo Police Department. So it was all female, I believe. And we had a ball, and it made people see us as human beings. But anyway, we meet regularly, and Thembi had been talking to the commissioner one time, and they were going over some ideas, and Thembi happened to mention body language and talking about how body language helps communicate with people. And the commissioner jumped at it and said, I want to do that. So Thembi sat down with me, and we started putting it together. And the very first group that we did it with was a group of we call our neighborhood engagement team. We have about 25 officers that are dedicated to working full-time in community policing. About half of those officers are part of what we call a neighborhood engagement team. They actually go into the neighborhoods, they engage the community, they go door to door, they try to set up block clubs, they try and find out what the problems are on the street. They try and figure out ways to solve the problems, be it a drug house, a bad tenant, whatever the problem is, gangs. So the first time we did this workshop was a little over 2 years ago. And we brought in neighborhood engagement team, which was made up of young officers all the way up to 35-year officers, seasoned veterans. And Thembi started talking. And if you know Thembi, she can be a very engaging person. She has a way of just breaking people down and relaxing you. But these officers were a little standoffish because it was all new to them. And at one point, Thembi grabbed a couple of the officers, big guys, like 6'2" plus officers in full uniform with bulletproof vests and the gun belt and the whole thing. Took them up, brought them up front, told them go stand off in the corner and just have a conversation, just talk. And they did. They just went over. I think they were talking about lunch or something like that. And Thembi looked over at them and said, "Okay, now make yourself smaller." And they looked at her kind of puzzled and kind of confused. And she looked back at them the same way. And she said, make yourself smaller. Just, lose some of that. And they're looking at her. They didn't know what to do. They started hunching their shoulders. They were bending their knees. They almost got down on her knees. And she's like, no. And that's not what I mean. Make your presence smaller. They didn't have a clue what they were talking about. They were relaxed. They were fine. But the appearance, they had their hands on their belts. And the appearance was that they were tough and strong and standoffish, and it's the perception that you get with an officer. Like I said, when you put that uniform on, your job is to look around and take care of things and know what's going on at every moment. When you're driving in a vehicle, driving in a neighborhood, patrolling, you're always on guard. You're always looking, and you kind of develop that as a police officer. Once that uniform goes on, now it's your job to start looking around and start and take care of business. So we got through that first workshop, and it went pretty well, I thought. I thought they got a few things out of it. They learned a few things, and we sat down and talked, and we decided that maybe to give Thembi a little bit better understanding of police officers and where they're coming from, that she should do some ride-alongs. And she jumped at it. She thought it was the greatest thing in the world. And I said, okay, we'll get you fitted for a vest. And she said, what? I said, we'll get you fitted for a bulletproof vest. And her eyes kind of bugged out, looked at me. I said, you okay? And she said, things just got kind of real. And that's exactly what it is, to get real. You're out there now. And she can give you some of the overview of some of the experiences that she had out there. But it was phenomenal. And if anyone else does pick up on this program, one thing I would strongly suggest is put your outline together of the program, present it to the police department or whatever you're going to do, but then do some ride-alongs first, because it'll help you to understand a little bit about where we're coming from. Police officers are human beings. That's, we go home to families. People always think, at the end of my shift, I go back to the police station, they put me in a closet, plug me into an extension cord and recharge me and pull me out in the morning, put me back on the street. We don't. We go home to families. We go home to children. We go home to wives. We go home to bills. We go home to problems. We go home to anniversaries and birthdays and the whole thing. And our biggest focus is to go home safe. Just like a football player, when he puts that uniform on, he can become that football player. He's safe in that uniform. He's out there, he's doing his job. When that uniform comes off, he's back to being whoever he used to be. That's who we are. What we're looking to do, though, with this program is while we have that uniform on, to make us a little more approachable, to tone it down. We strongly reinforce to the officers, we're not looking for them to give up any of their safety at all. We want them to stay safe, but we want them to come off a little softer, a little more approachable. When people call 911, it's already a bad day for them. They're already they're heightened. We show up there, and a lot of times they're yelling and they're screaming, and they're literally right there up in your face. And we're fortunate in the fact that we have a pretty young police department these days. We've had a lot of retirement, so most of our police department is young. So we have an opportunity now to train rather than retrain. And one of the things that we tell police officers is when you go on that call, when you're there, when that person is running up to you and in your face and cussing or yelling and screaming, take one quick second. Don't let them put their hands on you. Don't let them hurt you. But take one quick second and ask yourself, do I know that person? You don't. They're not talking to you. They're talking to this badge. They're talking to this patch on your shoulder. They're looking for somebody to help them. They want help. So the last thing we need to do is come off like we're being this tough, standoffish, we don't care person. And Thembi actually through this program has helped us to really, it's not that we're acting. We're not acting. We're not trying to be somebody we're not. She's just found a way through your profession to help us tone down a little bit that presence that has always been there with a law enforcement officer. And we love it. We think it's great. The young officers have a great time with it. Thembi spends usually a half a day with the class, and she does all different kinds of things with them that I'm sure she'll talk about. But they have a good time with it. And we've actually had feedback from officers saying, hey, I use some of those techniques and it works. And, one of the things Thembi had said to me a while ago was, your profession is always looking for ways to give back and get involved in the community. And I'll tell you, this is a way to get involved in the community. It doesn't cost anything other than a little bit of time. And in the world we live in today, where there's just such a hostile environment sometimes when it comes to law enforcement, we want to partner. We want to be partners with you guys, and you guys can be a huge help to us with that. And it's a great way, like I said, for you guys to give back to the community and help out in your community and maybe make a difference and show that we are partners and we really do work together. And when we work together, we can get some really good stuff done. And we've done some really good stuff in Buffalo. We're very proud of our programs, but that's another time. That's about it.
Thank you so much, Captain Nichols. That was excellent and very inspiring. I'm really proud to be partnering with him and the Buffalo Police Department. And I really want to reiterate what he said earlier about we are all partners and we all have a responsibility in the community, right? We're all community stakeholders and we all have something to contribute. So in terms of arts and civic practice, it's important for us as artists to think about, okay, how can we contribute to community building? Maybe we're used to being on stage, maybe we're used to telling certain types of stories, and that already has meaning, and that's great. But I think now we know that since most of us cannot be on stage at all, and only under certain circumstances, okay, how do you pivot? How do you repurpose? How do you reimagine the skill set that you've studied so long and developed so specifically? How do you reapply those skills? And this is one way we've done this. Now, Captain Nichols mentioned we've been doing this for a couple of years. So this was already something that community-minded folks were thinking, okay, how do we address these issues and how do we build a language that's maybe different than folks had already had for how they move through the world. So I ask people to think about, okay, in my mind, theater touches everything. So when we created this training, I thought about what aspects of specifically my training as an actor applied to this. And I thought about scenes, and I thought about costumes, and I thought about taking on a character. And we talk about that a lot in terms of how when you're out in the community, when you interact with a citizen, that's a scene. And you in your uniform are a character wearing a costume. They in their uniform of whatever they're wearing at that time, they're a character in a costume. And when we play with body language in these workshops, we explore how one person can inhabit any type of body language, and how we tend to project identities onto people based on their body language or based on what they're wearing. Because in a lot of cases, what you're wearing is part of your body language, right? Sending a message. And so we really are of like mind in how to just bring more awareness to that. We say a lot of times, we talk about adding tools to their toolbox. Police officers need a range of tools in their toolbox. One of the issues in the community that I see is a chasm. There's a space between different community members in terms of how to communicate and how to find common ground. For us, we really work hard to find common ground and help police officers develop ways of movement and ways of speaking and ways of gesturing to get closer to common ground with citizens. And like Captain Nichols said, this of course isn't applied in a life or death situation. We're not asking you to, use calming body language if somebody's pointing a weapon at you. But in a lot of interactions that police officers have in the community, their lives are not necessarily at risk in that moment, but something that they can do as far as a gesture or a word or their distance or the way that they position themselves can make a big difference in how a citizen responds and what happens next. And so we explore that a lot, and it's very interactive. And it was important for me to know what it was like for them. Now, I've never served as a police officer, so, I came in with assumptions and thoughts in the same way anybody else would. And I would say, if you're going to partner with any agency, with any entity, you need to have that empathy. You need to be prepared to understand their perspective as much as you expect them to understand yours. Sometimes artists can be a little bit self-righteous. Sometimes we can feel like we have all the answers and we know everything. I'm gonna be transparent here and like, oh gosh, imagine, right? But sometimes we do. And when Captain Nichols mentioned that the first group he brought me in with were veterans, I came in feeling very confident about what I knew and what I was going to change and what I was going to help them understand. And it did not go at all the way I expected. And it went well at the end. I sort of fought my way through as a teaching artist, but there was a lot that I didn't understand about law enforcement. And that's what took us to the ride-alongs. And so the officer that I went on two full shift ride-alongs with is Lieutenant Macy. I would love to now introduce him and bring him into the picture to talk about things from his perspective.
So I'm Craig Macy. I'm currently assigned to the intelligence unit within the Buffalo Police Department. We work on gangs and a lot of the violent crimes and special investigations. Prior to that, I worked in the community policing unit, which is what Captain Nichols spoke about before, which is neighborhood engagement team, which is where I had the privilege to meet Thembi and be involved in this program for a little bit and take her along on some ride-alongs and expose her to what policemen see on a daily basis. Prior to that, I was assigned to the housing unit. I was a community police officer there. I was there for maybe 5 or 6 years as a community police officer, which it was a very good experience because we got to work with different groups within the 27 different housing complexes. So each housing complex has a tenant council, which is basically like a block club within the different housing complex. So you hear about the problems or the concerns of that housing complex, and they're very different, right? Like some of the complexes are in North Buffalo, some are on the east side, some are on the west side, and some are elderly complexes, some are families and things like that. So it's this huge range of problems, demographics, quality of life, everything. It was a really good experience, and it was my first involvement in like heavily community policing, right? So from that, it was one of the biggest things I took away from it is like effective relationship building with people in the community, right? And what that looks like. In certain places, they literally just want you walking by to say hello. Other people want to sit down, talk to you for hours on end about everything under the sun and nothing to do with policing, but that's what they want out of you, right? And it's good because at the end of the day, when you need something from them or you have questions about what's going on in the neighborhood, they know you by your name, your face, and there's a lot more of a relationship between the actual people instead of a police officer and that complex or that tenant council and things like that. So that's where I really cut my teeth with community policing and learning all this stuff. And then once you incorporate that with being a relatively active street cop, you know, it sets you up for success with the actual law enforcement aspect, which Thembi got to see when we did our ride along. So our very first call was a gun call. So it's like a priority one call for us. That's like the lights and sirens, and you go, and a lot of cars go, and it was our typically those priority one calls, those crimes in progress, you get very little information. You get an address, and I think she had more questions about that call than the whole call took, right? Like, well, I don't understand. Why didn't you get this information? Why didn't you get that information, right? And all of this comes into play when you see police officers' personalities when they get to calls, right? Like they don't know what's going on, and somebody calls them, they want the police, and they're trying to get there as fast as possible. And she can tell you we were going probably about 90 with lights and sirens on the 33, getting there, and it's like you have this massive adrenaline dump, and you know, like, so you have you're going, right, you're there, and then you don't have a lot of information, and sometimes people aren't cooperative, sometimes they are, and this guy was cooperative. He was a pistol permit holder who dropped his gun, and so he got stopped, and we're like, all right. We talked to him for a few minutes. Everybody got in the car and left. She's like, wait, that's it? I'm like, yeah, that's it. And so like 2 full days of that with things, you know. And there was a comment that she made. She's like, I have never purposely turned down so many dark streets as in my whole life, let alone in a shift, right? And I'm like, oh, this is what we do. This is how things are going. And then from that, you have a lot of conversations in the car. When Thembi was talking about, you know, being involved with whatever entity you want to work with in the community and understanding what they deal with, we got a lot of conversations just about things in general, how things are and why they're like that from my perspective, from her perspective. And I think ultimately it helped the program, which will help the police department, which will help the community, just by doing those ride-alongs, right? Because it puts this perspective on both parts, you know, in focus. So, and when we're in that car, and since then, you know, like, and it's the same thing with the community, whether it's the two of us or just the police department. Well, what we try to do, and when we're in these relationships, we try to find common ground, and that worked very well for the two of us, and it always worked well for myself and the other community police officers, and most of the officers that I've known to be involved in community policing and these types of programs. You find the common grounds, you figure out how everybody can help them. They're with their piece of the pie, they can help you, you help them, and then you focus on that stuff, and then all the other problems and disagreements aren't such a big deal, because that's what you're not starting off on. Like, you're not butting heads originally right off the top. You're finding something that you can relate to. How do we fix this together? What do you have problems with? This is what I have problems with. How can we help? We identify the hurdles, And then from there, it just ends up being good with relationships in general. So it's about that.
Thank you so much, Lieutenant. So relationships, as you can imagine, are a theme, right? Coming up. That is the big, big message for us. We respect each other and we have empathy for one another, and we come to the table with that. Like Lieutenant Macy said, we lead with the common ground. We find the common ground, we start there, and we move from there. And I think that's something that and where we are in our world, that's really important to do, because you don't want to, need to, have to agree with people, or have the same experience or align on everything. It's more about, okay, where do we align? What are the connections we have? Where we do align is we care about the community. We want to care for the community. We want to serve the community. And so, okay, what are different ways we can do that? But that requires a certain growth mindset, right? If you already feel like you have the answers and you know how something's done, you're not going to seek out any new way of doing it. I think, for our side, if as artists, we decide, okay, we have a thing that we do, we perform and we have audiences, and that's the end of the story, and we don't want to do anything outside of that, then we'll stay in that one place. But if we want to grow, and if we want to think about serving the community and evolving as the world continues moving forward, we have to think, what are ways that I can use these skills, these experiences, and contribute to my world and to my community. And so this is a relationship that we've built over years. And so I would say that's a really important part of relationship building, is not expecting that you're going to walk in and go, okay, I have this idea, and I expect in the next, 5-10 minutes, we're going to be able to execute it and figure it out. No, I mean, and I learned that. I walked in with an idea that I thought was really going to be super simple and straightforward. And I learned that that was not the case. And the ride-alongs, like Macy said, were I spent a good amount of time with a lot of questions. There were also some moments where I was like, this is a hard job and it's a scary job, and it's real, again, like Captain Nichols talked about, when he told me, okay, I'm going to fit you for your vest so you can go on your ride along. And I'm like, oh, you mean like a cute vest, like a waistcoat vest, or, and I'm thinking, wait, I have to wear a bulletproof vest because I might actually get shot at. Like, that's a real thing, right? And obviously liability, they have to make sure that I'm safe, but it's just, that's what really makes it real. And it forces me to think about, okay, when I go to work every day, I'm doing something completely different than police officers, when every day they're, if they're on the street, they're putting their lives on the line every day. That is a difficult thing to have to get up and do to begin with, and contribute to what Captain Nichols talked about, where you develop that persona. So I approach it from a place of, okay, I've gotten to see with Lieutenant Macy what a day can look like for a police officer out there in the community. How can I incorporate language that he's talked to me about, experiences that I witnessed, ideas that I've seen back into the training, so that they don't feel like, okay, you don't know anything about our world. You're coming from this little actory kind of persona, which is what some of that first group felt, and rightfully so. I had not had those experiences yet. So as far as building partnerships, I think for us, especially if we're connected to nonprofits, we have to always be mindful of the length of time it takes to build a meaningful relationship, just like in your personal life, it takes time to build relationships. And also thinking about making sure that you don't approach relationships from a transactional perspective, that you're not already deciding what you think somebody else needs, and you're bringing the magic wand to wave at them and fix whatever you've decided is their problem, right? And we see that with a lot of nonprofits in the community. There's not a lot of exchange. It's more of like, I'm here to save you from your problem or your affliction. As to let's talk about how we can partner. What are your needs? What are my needs? What are my thoughts? And we develop that together. And that's what we've done. And that's why our relationship is so strong. And again, the mutual respect, the commissioner bringing together women in the community to talk about, what can we do for girls? What do girls need? And just empathy, really, really radical empathy is what I like to call it. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about a little bit was the actual process. So when we go into the police department, with the police headquarters, actually, I work with cadets now. We work with the classes of cadets coming out. So they've already gone through, how many weeks of training have they gone through by the time?
6 months.
Oh, it's 6 months of training. Sorry, 24 weeks. Is that 6 months? So six months of training, and they're towards the end of their process, right? And so they're in like a classroom setting, and they have a number of folks coming in front of them. It's not, but there are other agencies, other communities, and internal and external, that are working with them in a classroom setting. That's when I come into the picture. So they've gotten a lot of tactical training. They've gone through the academy. They're on the cusp of going out into the community. And so one of the things that I do is explore the idea of how theater connects. And my hope is to give them an opportunity to know the difference between the police officer persona and who they are as a person, to not take things personally when they are said about police officers or about them, and to understand that that, as Captain Nichols says frequently, they're talking to the badge. They're reacting to the badge. It's not you. They don't know you. And that's another thing. It's sort of to what Lieutenant Macy says, is that you have to build those relationships in the community so that they do know you. And when they see you, they don't just see the uniform, they see you as a person, and as a person who cares about the community, not just a person who's punching a clock and, doesn't really want to be there. So that's really important there. So I'm gonna pull up the PowerPoint that I use for the training, and then I'm going to share my screen if it doesn't keep, hold on. Okay, can you see it? Awesome, thank you, Holly. Okay, so I'm gonna just quickly shoot through it. So I start off, I talk about my background. I'm an actor, I'm a director, I do the acty things, just to establish credibility. We all know as teaching artists that that's what we have to do. We say, this is what I've done, and this is why I'm in this room. This is who I am. And so then I play with the ideas of the principles of acting, right? That we I play with the idea of the principles of acting. So in acting school, we learn about protagonist, antagonist, relationship, everything you see there on the screen, and how how an actor approaches a scene. And so I tell the officers, I say, okay, so imagine that you're an actor and you're in a scene and the other person is your scene partner, and think about it like that. The only thing that I change, and this is just when I teach acting to acting students in general, is that I don't see protagonist and antagonist as two separate people. I see that living in each character. So I like to start off with a question. I always ask before I just say, hey, this is what I'm explaining. And I ask the officers, okay, have you heard the word protagonist? Have you heard antagonist? Talk about what those words mean. And they usually will say, okay, good guy, bad guy. I've seen it in films, I've seen it in television, it's good guy and a bad guy. And so I talk to them about that idea, and I talk to them about how I teach protagonist, antagonist to be that for me, I am a protagonist. Even if I'm doing something bad, I don't see it that way, right? And that's something that when I direct actors, or just as an actor, gives you a richer story. Any of your favorite films, your favorite TV shows, who have somebody who might be doing something bad, but you're rooting for them, and you're like, why am I rooting for the quote unquote villain? It's because they're digging into that character so deeply, and they're forcing you to have empathy with them, and you're like, well, I guess if I were in that situation, I might do that too. I don't feel so bad about that. So you're helping people understand that you thinking that person is an antagonist is just you casting judgment on their choices. They're not thinking I'm terrible and I'm doing a terrible thing. They're like, this is what I have to do. This is what I do. So that also helps, in my opinion, officers build that empathy before they even see the person. And to Macy's earlier point, when he said, by the time we get to the call, your adrenaline is really high and you don't know what to expect because you have so little information. And for instance, when we see the guy who's the subject of the gun charge, I can remember myself looking at him like, he looks like a regular guy. He doesn't look like anybody who would be robbing. And it's like, okay, but what does that look like? You know, I'm already projecting things onto him that I could rob a store. I could shoot a gun at somebody. What would stop me, you know, other than my own decision not to do so? So you start to realize how you can project things on people based on how they look or, you know, your own life experiences. So then we go through those principles of acting and we experiment with that physically. I always get them up on their feet. We experiment with that. And I help them separate themselves from the uniform and separate themselves from the situation so that they can make decisions that are maybe, you know, not what their gut would have told them, or not what their pride tells them in some cases, right? And so we put those principles in action. We play with that. I show them images on body language. We ask questions and talk about, you know, okay, what is their body language like? When you see the young lady with her arms crossed, we have a conversation about, is she combative? Is she closed off? Or is she just cold? Is she nervous? Is she trying to protect herself? We have these broad conversations, and people get an opportunity to use their own instincts to discuss. You know, as you can see, I don't have a whole lot of text where I'm sort of reading text off the slides. We use images, and we talk about images because that's more effective than just trying to say, well, I have information, I'm giving it to you, and that's that. That's a lesson you learn as a teaching artist from these experiences of building empathy, is that I'm not here to tell you something that you don't already know. I'm not here to give you information you don't have. I'm here to have a conversation with you about something you already know, it's already in you, but I'm just giving you some language that might be useful. So then I mentioned various books on body language, and just let folks know there are tons and tons of books that have been published about body language. And most of them are typically aimed towards people in business, you know, oh, you're gonna make that deal, you're gonna close that account, that kind of thing. It's just been an obsession. What I used to do is I used to go back to the very beginnings of the study of body language and the study of psychology and all of that. And I would start to talk about that. And I realized that wasn't really as important as just mentioning, hey, there are a lot of books. If you want to read them, go ahead. But this is, you know, it's not a college course. You don't need to know the history of body language. We're in the now. So that's something I say, in this case was over the course of teaching this. So it's like, you should still evolve. You should always evolve based on what kind of responses you get. You should always continue to change and cut out things that aren't necessary, especially in these kinds of situations, because you really just want to cut to the chase. So, and I talk about how we're wrong sometimes, that sometimes somebody can just be cold. You know, you have to take the whole situation into context, and you don't want to be so stiff and rigid in your ideas or whatever your interpretations are that you've decided, oh, okay, you're closed off because of your body language, that there are many possibilities, but that you remain flexible and you use the information inside its broader context. And then I talk about the 4 elements of body language. Now I narrowed it down to 4. If you study, you look at various scholars on this, there's about 6 to 8, but I like these 4. So this is, you know, this is how I cut it down. I talk about occupying space, body control, reading and responding, and leading and following. And that's the fun part, because I get them out into the center of our circle. I will usually, after we do a writing exercise at the beginning, which I'll talk about a little bit, that we then get them into a circle. And I usually ask them to change the room around, because the room has tables in it. And so I say, okay, so let's get a circle of chairs with an empty space in the middle. And I trust you to figure out how to do that. And then I get to watch them engage with each other, and I get to see the group dynamics, which is always information for me, and how they reconfigure the room and get the chairs in there. And so once we do that, we experiment with calling people out into the circle. And I start with just their natural body language. Like Captain Nichols mentioned, I had the 2 officers come up and so, okay, talk about what you had for breakfast this morning. And so that's just to keep them occupied, so they're not looking at me and looking at the rest of the group. And then I have the rest of the group comment on their body language. And it happens every time. It happens with any body language training I've done, and the ones I've done in the past with business professionals and with interns and with nurses, is that there's a natural thing that we do when we approach each other in space. We even out the space. So if I ask 3 people to come out, they always end up looking like a little tripod. Their legs are about the same width apart, their body language is similar, and they all kind of give each other the same amount of space. Then I'll try to introduce another officer into the equation, and I'll let the officers in the circle already, okay, block the officer out, keep them from coming into the circle without words, or, I'll give them some sort of instruction. And we talk about that. So we all get to see that in a safe space, the ways that we already naturally exercise and utilize body language, right? So occupying space, body control, what you have control over in your body. Sometimes you'll see something that's ridiculous and you'll just be like, what? You get that ridiculous face. Well, do you have to? No, you don't. You can look completely stone-faced and inside be thinking that is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. And so for officers, of course, they know that they can do that. But I think sometimes because of the current relationship of the community with police officers, they're people. So we also have to think about, okay, people say things to and about officers that could potentially hurt their feelings or upset them. And, just a reminder of like, you're not the uniform. You have to separate and create that space so that you don't take things personally and you can still act in the service of the community. This is, by the way, a conversation that initially my vision, the artist who hadn't gone on the ride-alongs yet, thought, okay, if we're able to work with police officers and with community members and develop a common language, maybe we can then bring them together with this common language and see what happens then. Maybe there are others of us who can contribute to a productive conversation. And this came from me watching a community meeting where there were community members who were upset and were not, there were like this back and forth between officers and community members were upset. They weren't really listening. They weren't really communicating. I thought, oh, wow, maybe it's about communication and maybe it's about helping. And since that's what we do, I thought, hey, maybe I have something to contribute. And it all became something different, but to me, much more effective. And so I say all that to say that I think there is still work that needs to be done in the community as well. This is not just about, well, police officers need fixing and I'm going to go fix them. It's about how do we engage with all communities and say, hey, can we all have this common language and this common understanding? So a lot of that comes from there. So the reading and responding and leading and following are pretty much as they seem. We sort of play with the ideas of how can you take control over an exchange without the other person realizing it. And I talk to them about how I can affect people's body language in meetings. And it's something, and I say this now, knowing that I'm outing myself, that if a colleague sees this, they're going to know that I've done this, but that if we're in an in-person meeting, this is pre-COVID and we're all sitting at a table and I might not be speaking at the time, I will start to do things to pull other people's body language towards mine, just for practice. And so for instance, if you're in a conversation and people are talking and all of a sudden you just kind of do this, you just kind of wait. And after a while, everybody will have their hand on their face. And then if you decide you're going to just sort of lean back and kind of, open the space up a little bit, eventually other people will do that. And they don't even realize they're doing it, especially if they're talking. So it's just something that I use as an example for officers to say, you don't have to take the strong position all the time. Sometimes you can take a more relaxed or laid back position and the other person doesn't realize it, but it's the equivalent of rubbing your hand on their shoulder and calming them down. So there are just different ways that you can use body language as a tool. So then I connect the acting principles and the elements of body language. We talk a little bit about that. We do more in the middle space stuff. And then we talk about, well, why would you lead and why would you follow? Just this whole idea, because we just authority figure, they're in charge, they're in control. And I say, sometimes you can take kind of a more relaxed stance and it doesn't take away from your power and from your authority. And of course, I remind them that they're still in control. So as you can see, stop sharing that. The process is not to say, okay, I'm here to tell you a thing and you have to know this thing. The process is about, let's have a conversation. These are tools you already have in your toolbox. These are things you already know. And, we're here to help. So it's 1 o'clock now. I know we have a small number of participants. I was going to do a writing exercise. I don't think we need to, but I do just want to mention that the writing exercise I do is one I do with every workshop ever. I always want to do some sort of writing exercise so that I have some baseline perspective from the participants, because my hope is that at some later point I can revisit that with them, and maybe they do the same exercise or a different exercise, and there's something that they've learned about themselves. So it's mainly for them. And I have a little app on my phone called what is it? Tiny Scanner, that a lot of you probably know about. And it's a godsend. You are able to leave people's documents with them. Years ago, I would have to take people's documents and scan or transcribe them, and then I'd have to get them back to them, and they wouldn't get their writing back. So I learned how to just scan it in real time and then hand it right back to them. So I would usually ask questions along the lines of, what made you decide to become a police officer? What would you be doing today if you weren't? What do you already know about body language? What do you expect from this workshop? So I'd ask them a variety of, do you know about body language? What do you know? And then what do you, what's important to you about being a police officer? Those are the things that we would start with. And then we would go into the workshop, and then we would reflect at the end on, okay, well, what was different about what you expected? And how do you see yourself using this in the work? One of the things that Captain Nichols and I have talked about now is that the first set of cadets, the first class of cadets who I worked with, it's now been a year and a half that they've been out on the force. Mm-hmm. And so we're talking about, okay, so what has this at all had any impact? And how do we pull them back in to have a conversation? But they're police officers, are on the force, so it's like, if we pull a whole bunch of police officers in, what, like, who's fighting the crime? So we have to figure that out. But one of the things that I thought was interesting is the second ride along I went on, we were taking so there were two people in the back of the car who were going into the station. So the guy who is the officer who was like opening the door for me as we were walking in, we were going into central booking to see what that was all about. And he started to comment on my body language. And I started laughing. I'm like, oh, wow, this is great. And he was just like, what are you talking about? He didn't realize it was me. I was on the ride along. He didn't know. I guess he saw me out of context, not in the in HQ. Do y'all call it HQ? That's me. See, actors again thinking things. Okay, at headquarters. Booking. No, well, okay, right. But when we are at headquarters, right? Okay, yeah. Do you call it HQ? Oh, headquarters. Oh, they call it headquarters. Okay. See, I'm working on my own language. So we can go at HQ. I like that. It sounds cool. So when we're at HQ, doing the class, he sees me out of context at booking. He's not thinking of me, but he's commenting on my body language. Now, can I attribute his comments to something he already knew and was thinking about anyway, or the session that we had? Well, no, I can't prove it, right? But the fact that he brought it up says that at least he's thinking about it. And so that's really, when we have these measurements and these metrics that we have to put in place when we have grant funds and things like that to say, here's the impact, here's anecdotal evidence, here's empirical evidence, blah, blah, blah. This is a harder thing. This is one of the reasons why we're hopeful that we can help funders understand that there's certain types of impact that you can't put a number to, and that there are certain relationships that you build because they're important to build, and you need the anecdotes, you need the relationships, you need opportunities like this for us to talk about the impact of the work and for you to understand it directly from the perspective of the police officers. That's what you need to show the impact and the impact that it has on us and on me and how I better understand our community and how to build relationships. So I say that as artists, this is one way to serve the community beyond being on stage and beyond using our skills to entertain or inform with a transactional experience, right? I'm on the stage and you're in the audience and you pay a certain amount to see me, to agree to believe I'm some sort of character. And that's great, but there's so much more we can do with these principles, I think, in all areas of life, to share what we do, but also now the relationship we have with the police department, they have more ideas. Like Captain Nichols has talked about other things that we can do based on the experiences we've had. We've gotten some press picking up the program, and other folks in other cities have expressed some interest. We're hoping that things like this can pick up in other cities, and no, of course, not necessarily identical, but appropriate to a particular location, because you have to build that relationship first. And so I think it's important to start with the relationship, let the program come from the relationship, and let the funding reflect the priorities of the stakeholders in the community. So with that, I would love to entertain any questions that we have from the group, from the participants, and or I will use my own body language skills to see if Lieutenant Macy and Captain Nichols have any questions or things to add. Okay, they're giving me the thumbs up. Yeah, they feel like we covered it all. So I'm gonna turn it over to you, Tessa and Holly.
Great. Thank you so much, guys. This was wonderful. And I think it's a really great example of how the arts can support our entire community through this civic engagement. I think this is a perfect example of collaboration and community building through the arts. So thank you guys for sharing your experiences. Thembi, is it okay if I have people reach out to you if they have questions after the fact, if they're watching the recording? Great.
Yep. And they can, yeah, and if you want, you can share your information with them, or they can reach me at tduncan@shays.org.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you all so much. Have a wonderful afternoon. We have a 15-minute break, and actually we have a 20-minute break, and then we'll be going into the next sessions at 1:30. So thank you all so much.
Bye.